Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Now, Canada versus Saudi Arabia. The dispute between Canada and Saudi Arabia that started with a tweet has escalated to an all-out slanging match that has all but severed relations between the two countries entirely. Saudi Arabia has cancelled flights to Canada, recalled students studying there, cut investment, and issued threats. Meanwhile, Canada has pledged to hold its ground, leaving the temperature nowhere to go but up. Thursday brought the first sign of a limit to the dispute. According to the Saudi energy minister, the dispute will not affect oil exports to Canada. Khalid Al-Falih cited a long-standing policy that the oil trade isn't affected by political concerns. Well, Terrible, let me come to you. Yeah, it's been a big fight for about a week now between Canada and the United States over human rights issues. But you see, there is a caveat even to this serious, supposedly serious diplomatic row. Why is oil so important to both parties?
Well, oil, preserving their market share in global oil markets is in the interest of Saudi Arabia. And although they've cut the importation of items from Canada,
Bali
for example. But I do think that South Africa, much of the actions that have been taken have been one-sided, have been unilateral. Canada is yet to react, to take any action, apart from insisting that they stand by their comments.
And that they insist on the release of civil rights and human rights activists, particularly Sama Badawi and Fahir Badawi, the blogger who has been detained for so long.
And if the dispute is going to affect oil, it will not be up to Saudi Arabia to cancel the oil supply contracts. It will be up to Canada. So let's hope that this doesn't escalate to the point in which Canada will reciprocate the actions that South Africa had been taking. Let's hope Canada will just insist on their points being assimilated and acted upon, and not retaliate on the trade provocations.
Well, Prof, let me come to you. First, is this a normal thing in the diplomatic world? I mean, you have been in diplomacy your entire life. And secondly, other countries, the allies, particularly the United States, the United Kingdom, they've been saying, no, this is not our fight. We don't want to get involved. The official position of the State Department is that Canada and Saudi Arabia will sort themselves out. And the United Kingdom says we have nothing to gain from getting involved in this altercation. Is the U.S. trying to play a game, considering that U.S.-Canada relations is at an all-time low over NAFTA, over immigration issues, over trade policies?
You cannot be more correct in your analysis. And your question is also very legitimate. But it also explains why Canada has not been able to come out with a reciprocal statement. You see, when your allies are allowing you to find solutions to your own problems, you are alone. And now Canada cannot alone now do a battle and expect to succeed with Saudi Arabia. First point. The second point is that in diplomacy, at the end of the day, all these happenings do not constitute any big deal at all. But the truth is that if you consider French policy, all right, of distinguishing between political and economic interests. In other words, there's always a dichotomy between foreign policy interests and economic interests. You discover that that is what Canada has been implementing in its relationship with Saudi Arabia. When economic vital interests are at stake, you do not allow any political disagreement, all right, to be detrimental to it. So what Canada is doing now is to say, well, we stand by our position, but it will not be allowed to get into economic interest. What is really responsible? Saudi Arabia is a sovereign state, like Canada. The pronouncement by Canada itself is very, very offensive. Very, very offensive. You do not dictate. You do not command as if you are a field marshal. You don't talk in a disrespectful manner to a sovereign state. What Canada...
Prof, if you can hold it there, there is a Canadian interest involved, because Sama Badawi is a sister of Raif Badawi, the blogger who is in detention, whose wife is a Canadian. And there are members of the Sadawi family living in Canada and who are probably Canadian citizens. So to say that Canada was going beyond its bounds, doesn't Canada have the right to defend the interests of its citizens?
No, when you are defending your nationals, that's why private international law comes in. There are rules. We have diplomatic protection that applies to diplomats as defined by Vienna Convention. But we also have diplomatic protection which requires that when your citizens are denied justice, fairness in your host country, then you come in. Now, this is where Canada is coming in. Canada is now talking in terms of protection of its citizens, all right, in Saudi Arabia. But there is a mania of doing so. You cannot say immediately. Canada says they must be released immediately. Who are you giving command to?
Well, but of course, Prof, you will agree. Well, Modele, you want to say something?
The thing is, no country is an island, and I don't mean that literally. Everybody is interconnected. People are always getting into each other's, into somebody else's business.
No,
People are always commenting. They're always
not intervention.
No.
Well, in a world where there are norms, there are codes,
people would always say,
principles, conventions.
This is wrong. Can you not do this? All of the countries are guilty of doing that. How they say it is a different matter. But there's one point that you made, that the USA is standing aloof, is not getting involved. The USA hardly ever gets involved in Saudi Arabia's matter. Have you noticed? They seem to have this special relationship that's long-standing. It's economic, it's diplomatic. They hardly... When Saudi Arabia is being criticized for, and they're often criticized for
human rights abuses, mostly,
USA hardly ever gets involved. If you remember, most of the people who carried out the 9/11 attacks were Saudis. But when Trump was going to ban some countries from where terrorists were said to originate, Saudi Arabia was not even mentioned. So that relationship, the more you look, the less you see.
Well, let's go back to Africa, where just after a week, the inauguration of Zimbabwe President Emerson Mnangagwa has been halted after a legal challenge by the opposition against the election result. The leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, MDC, Nelson Chamisa, says he has evidence to show that he was cheated out of the 30th July presidential vote. His party says the poll was marred by mammoth theft and fraud, but the Electoral Commission insists that there was no score dodgery. Mr. Mnangagwa won 50.8% of the vote, compared with Mr. Chamisa's 44.3%. The inauguration is no longer going ahead as planned, Justice Minister Ziyambi said, after the opposition filed a challenge on Friday. Zimbabwe's constitution allows a presidential candidate to legally challenge electoral results within 7 days of a winner being declared. The Constitutional Court now has 14 days to rule on the legal challenge by the Movement for Democratic Change. The party must prove that any irregularities were grave enough to change the outcome of the vote. If it does this successfully, the court could order a recount or nullify the result altogether. Mr. Chamisa wants the court to declare him the winner or call a fresh election. Prof, what's going on in Zimbabwe? Because apart from this issue over, the election, there's also been issues of repression against the opposition, a lot of violence, and Mnangagwa insisting that he must retain that seat and he is the legitimate winner, and the opposition also insisting. And the administration has been accused of targeting members of the opposition. In fact, one of them, BT, former finance minister, ran across the border to Zambia. He was sent back in handcuffs He was denied asylum on the grounds that there is no problem in his country. When it is so clear that indeed there is a problem in Zimbabwe, what do you think?
The election itself was problematic. All right? The announcement of the result was delayed. Hence, another source of additional problem. More significantly, the position of Robert Mugabe, all right, has been taken very lightly. What did he say actually? How did Mnangagwa himself manage to succeed Robert Mugabe not to come to the level of the elections? Zimbabweans certainly are showing the rest of Africa that democracy can actually have a bright future, all right, with the developments. The politics in Zimbabwe has largely been characterized by tolerance, perseverance. You will recall that even the incumbent president, when he was campaigning, his life was targeted. He was shot, but he not only means that.
An explosion.
Explosion. Now, the problem for us, and from which we can learn lessons in Nigeria, is this. 50.8% compared with about 44%, well, it's majority. But since there is a complaint now, and due process was followed, taken to the court, and within the next 14 days, we are expecting that there will be a feedback. I think this is what we should appreciate in this case. There is every reason to lend credence to the position of the opposition, because Mnangagwa has not been able to convince the world as to why there was delay in computing and announcing.
It's not the Electoral Commission.
The position of the observers, the international observers, the EU, the AU, and all the other groups, is that in fact there were too many irregularities in that election. And I think that we should be saying to President Mnangagwa that the repression of the opposition must stop, and that the due process of law must be allowed to take its course.
We belong to the same school of thought.
He has his problems, not just with the opposition, but even now with his deputy, because he has set up a committee to probe the military assault on protesting civilians on August 1.
Precisely.
And, you know, there may be friction there. But Modeli, doesn't this sound so familiar? Isn't this the kind of thing we usually have in Nigeria?
This is the kind of thing that we usually have across Africa,
Okay.
which is a shame. We really need to work on our democratic processes. We need to work on our elections so that there isn't this much dispute about results and outcomes.
And transition politics.
And transition politics. That really is in a nutshell.
Well, the last word from you.
Well, it's slightly different from the situation in Nigeria, in that the declared winner will be sworn in anyway, if this were to be in Nigeria, and then you go and challenge in court. You can win 3 years later.
We're talking about Zimbabwe now, but so as you speak,
yes,
there's a runoff election going on also in Mali, between the incumbent President Keita and his main challenger. And we are also hoping that in that process, it will be free and fair.
So 14 days.
Who came third and fourth, they have said they are not getting involved. So quite an interesting situation.
14 days are not too long. So let's wait and hope that the court proceedings. For
he's talking about Zimbabwe now.
We can take another look. We can take another look.
We also keep an eye
after
on what
14
is
days.
going on in
Yes,
Zimbabwe.
that's right.
You've been watching this live, this Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati. From our entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching. See you next week.